All right, folks, let's talk about libertarianism in defense of free will. So what is libertarianism? Libertarianism is the philosophical position that argues that some, I repeat, some human decisions and actions result from free will. Indeed, libertarians admit that some of our actions are determined by the natural law of cause and effect, and therefore not all of our actions and decisions are free. For example, when you go to the doctor's office and he or she, tests your reflexes by using the little hammer to hit your knee, when your leg kind of kicks out, that is not a result of free will. You didn't choose willfully to do that. You're not in control of that. Rather, your leg kicks out as a result of cause and effect. It is determined. And we can use the same logic for if we visited a haunted house and let's say someone comes in from behind you, says boo, and then you scream out in fright. When you scream out, one could argue that that is a determined response, that someone said boo, that was the cause, and the effect was that you screamed, and that was, not a choice. It was not something that was deliberate. It was just a reaction that resulted from the laws of cause and effect. Nevertheless, libertarians believe that human beings are capable of free will, and that some of our decisions and actions are free. Now, there are three major libertarian arguments that try to advocate this position: the argument from deliberation, the argument from agent causation, and the argument from moral responsibility. So let's review each of these in chronological order. So the argument of deliberation was conceived by 20th century philosopher Corliss Lamont. And he argues that we are capable of free will because we have the ability to deliberate. And deliberation, properly defined, is the unique ability humans have to consciously and objectively weigh the pros and cons of a decision and then make a choice. So in other words, we have this ability to kind of deliberate our choices. So in this case, should I choose choice A or choice B? Well, if I choose choice A, then this will happen. Choice B, then this will happen. So we have this ability to kind of weigh the pros and cons of our decisions and kind of try to foresee the effects of our choices. And Lamont argues that the ability to deliberate is an objective thing. That is, we're somehow able to pull ourselves away from the environmental, mental, emotional, and physical conditions that would, determine our choices and actions. And Lamont further explains that the faculty of deliberation gives human beings control over their decisions. We're kind of like in the driver's seat, when we deliberate. And thereby, the will is not merely manipulated by the chain of cause and effect, but rather the chain of cause and effect is manipulated by the will. So when we deliberate, it's not like our choices are just being caused by the laws of, cause and effect, but rather, we're somehow able to take all of those conditions and manipulate them and kind of change the causal chain in accordance with our will. And as Lamont writes, there is the unmistakable intuition of virtually every human being that he is free to make the choices he does, and that the deliberations leading to those choices are also free-flowing. The normal man feels too, after he has made a decision, that he could have decided differently. That is why regret or remorse for a past choice can be so disturbing. All right, so we've talked about the argument from deliberation, so let's talk about the argument from agent causation. And this was conceived by 20th century philosopher Roderick Chisholm. And he argues that humans have free will because we have the ability to make choices ex nihilo, or out of nothing. All right, well, what in the world does that mean? So for Chisholm, the human mind has a special metaphysical status in comparison to other natural phenomena, in that it has the ability to make choices out of nothing. So in other words, it's wrong to compare the human mind with a tree. a tree is a natural phenomenon, but the human mind, it just has a different metaphysical status and it just operates differently than other natural phenomena. As Chisholm writes, men are sometimes, but of course not always, self-determining beings. That is, beings which are sometimes the causes of their own behavior. Each of us, when we act, is a prime mover unmoved. Now, prime mover unmoved might remind you of what we learned about in the philosophy of religion unit. And rightly so. That is, Chisholm argues that human beings have a unique and mysterious God-like ability to make free choices. So God is perfectly free, God can create things out of nothing, and so can human beings. That is, determinists assume that all human behavior can be reduced to scientific laws of cause and effect, which for Chisholm is a mistake. And as he writes, there can be no complete science of man. There will be human actions which we cannot explain by subsuming them under any scientific laws. So again, the human mind is just like an outlier in the natural world. And therefore, sometimes we just cannot explain, how our decisions work, how our free will works, but it is nonetheless free sometimes. And this brings us to our last argument, the argument from moral responsibility. And the kind of father of this position is 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. And he argues that even if we cannot metaphysically prove that we have free will, we should still assume that we have it anyway. For Kant, you see, the debate over free will never yield any results. That is, human choice is just too mysterious and we will never figure it out. But even though it's a mystery, we should still assume that we have it. Okay, why? Because if we do not have free will, then none of us can be held morally responsible for our actions. And Kant is proposing what is called a pragmatic justification for free will, that adopting a doctrine of free will has certain practical benefits. In this case, by assuming that we have free will, we can therefore assume that we are morally responsible for our actions. I mean, imagine a world in which we adopted determinism. No one could be held morally responsible for their actions because they would just blame environmental conditions and physical conditions and their upbringing and things of that nature. So our entire legal system, our entire society would fall apart if none of us were morally responsible. So Kant basically argues, look, free will is a mystery, we'll never figure it out, but nonetheless we should assume that we have it anyway in order for society to be held together. Yes, so as I said, the practical benefit to uphold moral responsibility. I forgot about this slide. All right, so in conclusion, contrary to determinists, libertarians argue that some of our decisions and actions result from free will. And Corliss Lamont and Roderick Chisholm argue that the human mind has the ability to break or even manipulate the causal chain, which results in free decisions. Immanuel Kant, on the other hand, admits that we can never know whether free will is a reality, but we should nonetheless accept it for practical reasons to uphold moral responsibility.